This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Today we are back with part 2 of our little duology on reading for pleasure. We're going to look at the reading for pleasure pedagogy. We're going to think about the best ways to encourage our children to read for pleasure and why we should be doing it for ourselves.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday the 26th of October 2024. It is 9 a.m. and you are here with me, Darren Lester, on our Saturday breakfast show here on Teachers Talk Radio. We are here this morning with what has evidently become one of our cursed shows. You will know, if you are a long-term friend of the show, that we have these every so often. We have these topics that I try to do, and everything around it just seems to go a little bit wrong. So, as I kind of said in the intro there, I tried to... No, I didn't try. I successfully did a show on reading for pleasure 2 weeks ago now. The last Saturday morning breakfast that was kind of made available as a podcast, but I overplanned it and I only actually got through 1/3 of what I wanted to get through. So I decided that I would not try and cram everything else that I had prepped into the last 5 minutes of the show, or however long I had left, and I would cut it and carry on the following week. That would have been last week. So last week, if you were here, you will know that we started off really well. We got about 22 minutes into the show. Joe was giving us the news, and then I had a power outage, and we did not come back. Which is, as they always used to say, I don't know whether they still do, but as they always used to say on breakfast telly, that is how you know we are live. If something goes wrong, that's how you know that we are not lying to you, that we are indeed here live talking about the joys of teaching. So this is going to be a third time lucky for this show. We are going to be talking a bit more about reading for pleasure. A couple of weeks ago when I started this off, I talked about the benefits of reading for pleasure. We looked at the cognitive science behind reading for pleasure and why we should be getting our kids to do it. So if you haven't heard that show, please do go back and check that one out. You can, of course, listen to today's show without having listened to that one. That's not an issue at all, but I do encourage you to go back and have a listen. Today we are going to talk specifically about pedagogies to do with reading for pleasure. We are going to look at 2 studies that I found, which kind of talks about how we can encourage reading for pleasure, which is a bit oxymoronic, isn't it, really? This idea that we can encourage students, that we can kind of instill in our young people an interest in doing something for pleasure, because inherently that suggests that it's something that should come from inside the individual. It's something that we each should think about on our own, in our own terms, led by what interests us. But the thing that I love about books is that you can get books about literally everything. If there is a topic, there is a book on it. It might be fiction, it might be non-fiction, it might be paper, it might be digital, it might be the written word, it might be audio. It could be all of them, because we know that publishers like to put the same books out in different formats to make them accessible to us. And so, there really are books for everybody. And I think quite often that's something we forget. I think sometimes we as adults and our young people, we define ourselves as either readers or not. And I've noticed this in the book influencer community on social media. A lot of them will talk about how they weren't readers for a very long time. And then they came back to books and they kind of rediscovered that love of reading, which is great, which is really, really important. But I don't think that we need to necessarily define ourselves in that way, because I think that really everybody is a reader. I think, if you read something, you are a reader. And in the first part of this show a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how reading can be anything. It can be novels, kind of like as we suggest it to be, as we want it to be, in that kind of gatekeeping of what is appropriate for people kind of way that we do. But at the same time, it may also be comic books. It may also be football sticker books. It may also be the back of a cereal packet. If your brain is processing words, then you are a reader. Now, of course, there are debates to be had, conversations to be had about the difference between audio and text, for example. Where is the difference between an audio nonfiction book and a podcast? Am I a book right now? The answer to that is no, I'm a podcast. But actually, where is that distinction? I think as books become more multimodal, that is an interesting conversation for us to have. But that, of course, is not a conversation for today. And just know that today, like 2 weeks ago, whenever I talk about reading, I am in fact referring to reading of all kinds. We're talking about books, physical paper books. We are talking about ebooks. We are talking about audiobooks. I'm kind of being inclusive in our chat today. So if you have any strong opinions on reading for pleasure, please do get in touch. If you are listening live via the Podbean app, you can text me. The opportunity to do so is right there in the app. I will read your text out live on air, and you can engage in the conversation that way. If you are listening live elsewhere, you can tweet me. I am at Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER. I will again read your tweet out on air and we can engage that way. If you are listening but not live, so if you are listening back in podcast form and it is no longer 9:08 on Saturday the 26th of October 2024, you can still tweet me and we can have that conversation on social media, because again, as I always say, and I say this so often, it should become a little jingle or an ident or something, so that I can just press play instead of using my voice to say it each and every week. These are topics that I am perennially interested in, so I will always want to know what your opinions are on them.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK. to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the number one reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study schools that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking and feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week and BBC Breakfast both focused on the importance of work experience for young people, as new research shows the scale of the challenge involved in meeting the government's aims of 2 weeks for all. A report by the Social Market Foundation looked at the role of assumed knowledge in youth transitions from education to employment. The evidence, the report says, shows that young people from more privileged backgrounds and those with graduate parents appear more confident and adept at navigating their way through education and into careers. Data from Management Information System ARBA suggests that work experience provision varies hugely across the country. But overall, while 78% of secondary schools in the sample recorded some pupils as having done some work experience in Year 10, only 49% of pupils themselves actually took part. Where pupils were getting work experience, it averaged at just under a week. Just 2% of pupils completed 2 weeks. The government is aiming to guarantee 2 weeks' worth of work experience for every young person, but many say the plan is too ambitious given the current position. For the target to be achieved, many more employers will need to offer places, quadruple the current number, or at least those who already offer it to give more days to more pupils. The research suggests that there is a stark north-south divide. In all regions in the north of England, the proportion of pupils who go on work experience is lower than in the south. Schools suggest that the cost of organising and running placements was high, as it took staff to organise it and make visits, check health and safety, and that this placed pressure on already tight budgets. Some also said the pandemic had made things more difficult, as working from home had changed the way businesses work. Schools Week also reports on delays to the publication of 2024 league tables. Parents choosing a secondary school for their child this month will now not be able to see the most recent performance league tables after government delayed their publication. The move follows schools finding errors with their Key Stage 4 and 5 results data in pre-publication checks. The school's checking exercise deadline has now been extended until the 7th of November. Secondary data was due to be published on the 24th of October and would include Progress 8 scores. Parents choosing a secondary school for their child must submit their choices by October the 31st. The data allows parents to compare schools, but leaders said the delay should not cause a huge inconvenience, as many will have already made decisions based on open days, other information and experiences. The Department for Education said that a new portal had suffered technical difficulties, but that they were working hard to resolve it. The BBC reports that the government is considering a smacking ban for England. Bans have already been brought in by devolved governments in Scotland and Wales, as well as Jersey, which outlaws the use of physical violence to punish children. Plans for the laws in England were rejected by the previous government as recently as last year. The move comes following fresh calls for a ban by the Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel de Souza. She said, "If we are serious about keeping every child safe, it's time England takes this necessary step." In England and Northern Ireland, it is legal for a carer or parent to discipline their child physically if it is reasonable punishment. But the Children's Act 2004 made it illegal to assault a child causing actual or grievous bodily harm. Finally, Sky News covers the issue of teachers who experience bullying at work and who signed non-disclosure agreements as part of their exit from the workplace. Sky News says it has spoken to more than 320 current and former teachers from the state, private and special school sectors across the UK. Among those, 119 say they signed NDAs and received payouts. Sky News says it has calculated the amount paid out at more than £1.73 million. The National Education Union confirmed that the vast majority of financial settlements include NDAs, but that these were not appropriate as it covered up the issue and prevented further investigations. The NEU went on to say that it felt that the growth of multi-academy trusts had contributed to a significant power imbalance between management and teaching staff. Ofsted declined to comment on the findings of the investigation, which also suggests pressures on leaders from the Inspectorate caused additional stresses in schools. Education Minister Catherine McKinnell responded to the Sky News investigation by saying all school staff should feel safe and supported at work. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. Really interesting, as always, to hear the roundup of the news over the past week. It was the work experience that kind of leapt out at me today, because I guess my big question is, why actually is it a school's responsibility to organise work experience for its pupils? Now, I haven't really thought about this because I, of course, came through the system. I came through the English system. I did work experience. I don't remember whether it was year 10 or year 11, but I did work experience in my old junior school. And, you know, it was 2 weeks. And it was a really nice experience for me. I enjoyed my work experience. But I'm not entirely sure why it was done during school time. And kind of now from the other side with my teacher head on, I'm not entirely sure why, when we already have overly packed curricula, how we can justify taking a week, 2 weeks out of the timetable in order to do the work experience, in order for our kids to go off and do their work experience. And that's before we talk about the things that Joe raised, such as the funding for staff to organize it, you know, having to go out, let's be honest, probably in your own time in order to check the workplace, to check its safety, to do the risk assessments, to make sure that everything complies with keeping children safe in education, you know, all of the stuff that we would need to do as part of our duty of care. And again, it kind of comes down, I think, to what I've talked about before, which is that schools are not schools anymore. We are children's centres now. We are expected to kind of be the social service for children, which is very much diluting what we can offer, and is in fact just doing our children a disservice. Do you remember not too long ago there was the call, and I don't know if it's still going on, but there was the call to make the summer holidays shorter. And I think they used the curve of forgetting to justify it. The idea that, you know, kids go away in July and they forget a lot of what they've learned by September, ignoring the fact that the curve of forgetting actually doesn't work like that, and that it's a much smaller scale thing, and nobody seems to take that in mind when they come up with timetables or when exams are going to be. But why can things like work experience not be done during holidays? If we're saying, children have too much free time, if we're going back to that kind of Victorian ideal of where they need to be organized and scheduled at all times, if we're saying that they are forgetting things, if we're saying that they are not being properly socialized, why are places other than schools not putting these things on during the summer holiday, during the half term, whatever it might be? Why must time be taken away from learning in order for them to have work experience? Now, I think we all know the answer to that question. It's because the actual learning in a school is quite low on the list of priorities, sadly. And I don't think it should be. I am very much a teacher because I believe in learning. I'm a teacher because I believe in education. I believe in the power of broadening your mind. And I do think that this is one of the ways that we are doing our children a disservice, because we are expected, like I said, we are expecting schools to be everything for them. And that does unfortunately mean that the actual learning, the actual education, the knowledge, the exploring all of the cool stuff about the world is gone. I also think, from a cultural capital point of view, that if work experience were taken on by somebody else, a different social service, then we would find more equality in the types of work experience our pupils were able to get. Because at the moment, work experience generally relies on children being able to find their own connections, parents being able to secure a placement, or the child having the kind of wherewithal to go somewhere and say, can I come and do work experience with you? Or the school being able to use its connections. So once again, school staff being able to use their own personal connections in order to secure a placement. And of course, that means that the better connected your parents are, or the better connected your school is, the more opportunities for different types of work experience your children are going to have. Whereas if there was some kind of regional, it would have to be regional, wouldn't it? National would be far too broad. But if there was some kind of regional work experience placement scheme that was put on, that kind of had access to everybody, or at least everybody who was willing to take on somebody for work experience, we might be better placed to put our children in a placement that they would find interesting and that they would find useful, instead of just doing it for the sake of getting some work experience. The other thing that I find quite funny about the whole concept of work experience is how many schools object to their children having part-time jobs. Because I've worked in schools where part of the homeschool agreement was that children in years 11, 12, 13 will not have a part-time job. They will spend, or they will focus on their studies. So what we're kind of saying to them in that case is, your labor is not worth selling. It's not worth exchanging for money, but it is worth giving away for free. And I just think that's really sad that is a message that we are sending out to our young people. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like work experience itself has a place, but I don't think it has a place in school. I don't think it should be down to the school to organise, and I don't think it should take place during school time. Not when there are lessons that can be taught, not when there are trips that can be gone on. I think it's time that schools were not the only thing that provided opportunities for children. But what do I know? I'm just a teacher. Today we are talking about reading for pleasure. Now, I have very sadly done almost no reading this week. In fact, I'm not sure I've done any. I did take receipt yesterday of a very cool new book that I am reading to review. It's very fancy, very hardcover, very academic. So we're enjoying that. I am looking at my physical TBR pile, which is still including that book. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh, I have to buy a new book. I can't have a TBR pile that's got 13 books on it. That feels like bad luck. I feel like that is a good justification to buy a new book, isn't it? It is 13 books deep. I had lots of grand intentions of finishing my physical TBR pile by the end of the year. That was, if you listened to my goals show from the beginning of September, that was one of my goals. But I wasn't supposed to be adding books to it, and I have. So that won't be happening. But we do enjoy a good book. We do enjoy reading. And for me, one of the big issues when it comes to reading for pleasure is justifying it. I find it difficult to justify sitting down and reading a book when there is work that could be done, when there are, essays to be marked, when there are lessons to be planned, when there are emails that could be sent, when there are chores to be done, when there is shopping to be done. There is so much to do all the time that just sitting down to read for the sake of reading feels like an indulgence. One of the reasons I'm quite excited about the book review that I'm going to do is that it kind of gives me a justification to read. I have to read this book because I have been contracted to write a review for it. And that's really sad. Not sad that I've had the opportunity, very grateful for the opportunity, feeling very blessed, but sad that I kind of think that way. And I'm somebody that does identify as a reader. I'm somebody who, will quite happily talk for hours on the positive nature of books. I'm somebody who likes to think that he will sit for hours and read. But there is always that kind of niggly voice, isn't there, at the back of the head, or at least there is for me, saying you should be doing something. You should be doing something productive. Tim has texted in, good morning to you. Tim is a long-term friend of the show. We're going to acknowledge the bias because I think that's really important. Tim is a children's writer. He writes for children and young adults. And so, is just as biased towards books as I am. And in fact, he was my first guest here on the show and we talked about books. But Tim has texted in to say, I think reading is a form of self-care. And that is absolutely true. I think that is absolutely true. But again, that's an interesting conversation, isn't it? About that justification of self-care, about being able to turn around and say, I am taking this time to do something for myself. And I don't know why we struggle with that. There is always the gut reaction that I see, particularly on social media, is Puritanism. We are still a culturally Puritan country in England. And so, there is virtue in hard work is the old adage. And so maybe we are kind of culturally raised to believe that we should be working all of the time. I think that social media has a lot to do with this idea of being constantly working, particularly the hustle culture that you see, where you get these vloggers, these YouTubers, these TikTokers who do that full time as a job. And so they will turn all of their day into content. You know, you see the people who do speed cleaning videos, where they've been able to monetize cleaning the toilet. You see people doing monetized reading sprints, where they are being paid to read. And they will quite openly talk about how they are kind of always working. Because, you know, they've monetized their hobbies, they've monetized cleaning the house, they've monetized going shopping, whatever it might be. And it is true that they are always working. But it is also kind of cyclical, because they are always working because they have monetized their hobbies. And so, you know, yes, for them, sitting and reading a book might be work. Whereas for us, it would be leisure. And you then, of course, get these messages of these people that you're watching, these people that you're following, who are always working. But they are doing so because they are able to monetize the things that they enjoy doing. They are monetizing sitting and reading a book. And so I think it's very important not just to be media savvy, not just to be social media literate, but also just to be very aware of the messages that you are being given. And that, you know, yes, the people on social media are always working, but that doesn't mean that we have to be. That's not how they're trying to influence us. Because in fact, the in inverted commas, influencer lifestyle is, or should be, the opposite of that, shouldn't it? It should be about how to do more self-care, how to take better care of yourself, how to lead a more balanced life. So I do think that's quite an interesting dichotomy. But yeah, it is difficult to justify that time. So of the 13 books that I have to read, there are 2 that I kind of would feel comfortable sitting in my chair and just openly reading. And that's the one that I'm doing a review for, because I can link that back to work. And it's the one that I am doing a seminar on in a few weeks' time, because I can link that back to work. Now, of course, that is an issue with me. But I imagine it's an issue for lots of us, kind of justifying that self-care. And I think, again, particularly in teaching, and I've talked about this on the show before, and I know that this is not just an issue with teaching, but this is Teachers Talk Radio, so that's kind of where I'm gonna lead. But where the people who are lauded as being good teachers are the ones who will willingly give up their time. They are the ones who will go on the trips. They are the ones who will do the one-to-one revision sessions. They are the ones who will write essays of marking. And so quite often performative busyness is an issue, because we all want to be considered good at our jobs. And if one of the ways of being good at your job is giving up your hobby, is giving up your free time in order to do other things for your job, then that's kind of what you're going to do. So I think talking about self-care, talking about reading for pleasure, talking about why all of this stuff is important, it's good to be self-aware. And it's good to think about why you are doing the things that you are doing, or why you're not doing the things that you're doing. Are you not reading? I'm just calling myself out here right now, to be honest. Am I not reading because I genuinely don't have time to read? Or am I not reading because I feel guilty about doing something that is not work? And if that's the case, why do I feel guilty about it? Is it because I'm putting off work? In which case, yeah, okay, maybe there is some guilt to be had. Or is it because I feel like I should be doing some busy work because everybody around me says that they're always working, and so that's something that I feel that I should be doing too? I don't know. But we're going to start by talking about the reading for pleasure pedagogy. This comes from a joint study by the Open University and the UK Literacy Association, which was called the Teachers as Readers Study. Love this. I really wish that I had known about it before and that I could have been involved, because I think this is really cool. But essentially what they were trying to do was establish effective ways to support reading for pleasure in children and young people. And I think this can be extended to adults as well. They've put together a whole website that I will tweet out later on so that you can have a look at it. But essentially what they did was this entire project involving teachers, trainee teachers, librarians, and English leaders in order to look at how we can nurture lifelong readers in our children and young people. Now, again, I talked already about why we should be nurturing lifelong readers in the show a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not going to go into that here. If you haven't listened to that show, please do feel free to go back through the archives once this one is finished, of course, and check that out. So for now, we're just going to take for granted that it is important to read, that it is important to be a lifelong reader. And again, if you want the justification for that, go back and listen to the show from a couple of weeks ago. But essentially, the reading for pleasure pedagogy that the Teachers as Readers project developed can be boiled down into 4 core practices. Reading aloud, which is the one that I'm a bit iffy about, for reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. Social reading environments, talking about and recommending books, and independent reading. So there are these kind of 4 facets to this idea of the reading for pleasure pedagogy. The research that the project did showed that before the project, teachers involved didn't really focus on reading for pleasure, or at least they didn't really focus on any pedagogies to encourage it. Because like I said at the top of the show, it does seem a bit oxymoronic, doesn't it? This idea that we can encourage people to enjoy something. Because enjoyment, passion for things, it feels like it should be innate. We know that we all have different interests. We know that our interests are the things that make up part of our personalities. So it feels like these interests should all be different and kind of shouldn't be malleable. But it turns out they are. Many of the activities that teachers did to foster reading for pleasure were one-offs, and they didn't really support the kids who didn't identify as readers, the ones who said that they didn't like books, the ones who were not really interested in the concept of reading. And before we kind of move on, and while we're thinking about that, I think it is important to acknowledge the role that schools can play in turning children off of reading. Now, we've all read it. We have all probably said it at some point in our lives, but a lot of the books that we study in school are not interesting to young people. I say this a lot about the MFL curriculum. A lot of the books that we study at A-level, a lot of the films that we study at A-level don't particularly have a hook for young people. They are not particularly interesting to young people. They are just there because they are considered to be classics of the genre. And there's nothing wrong with classics. I love Shakespeare. I have shamefully never read Jane Austen. I don't think I've read anything by Jane Austen, but I believe that she should be held in high regard. I very much enjoy the poetry. I very much enjoy, what we might consider the canon of English literature. I like Dickens. But quite often, the things that we get our young people to engage with are way, way outside of their experience and way, way outside of their empathy. And I think that getting that balance between the two is really, really important. Because if we only read things that tallied with our own experience, that would kill fantasy and sci-fi as genres. In fact, it would kill all genre fiction, really. So I'm not saying that we should only read things that are to do with our lives. That's just as bad as the old writer's advice of to write what you know, because that doesn't make any sense either. But I do think that where we try and really focus on the symbolism and the pulling the books apart, which I do also think is valid and I actually quite enjoy and I enjoyed at school, we detract just from the idea of reading a book because it's fun to read a book. And again, I think that may boil down to, or it may be the root cause of, why just sitting down to read feels like such an indulgence. Because, since we were about 11 years old, everything that we read ended up being analysed. And again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I consider myself to be an academic. I write papers on popular culture. So I would be such a hypocrite if I said that we shouldn't be analysing books and TV shows and things like that. But if that's all we do with them, then it kind of teaches people that that's what they are for, and it detracts from the idea that they can be read just for the sake of being read. So let's have a look then at those 4 core practices that make up this reading for pleasure pedagogy. So they were, just as a reminder, reading aloud, social reading environments, book talk and book recommendations, and then independent reading. Now, reading aloud is an interesting one. This is a conversation that we've had a lot in the MFL community over the past 18 months or so, because reading aloud is now on the speaking exam for the new GCSE. But I was always trained not to make children read aloud. So when I went through my initial teacher training, we were told that reading aloud actually has no benefit because it puts a lot of children off. They don't like to read aloud. And quite often when you are reading something out loud, you are so focused on the act of reading that you're not processing what you're reading. And I think we've all experienced that, where you've read something out loud, maybe to a class even, and then you realise that you've actually got no idea what you've just read. Because those cognitive processes are different and they're almost conflicting. And if you are reading aloud, particularly if you are a child who is not necessarily anxious, but doesn't particularly like being in the spotlight, but you're going to do it anyway, or you've been forced by your teacher to do it, then you are going to be more focused on not stumbling over your words, making sure that you pronounce everything correctly, looking ahead to make sure that you've actually heard of all of these words that you're about to read out loud, and not focusing on the actual bones of the text, not focusing on what is there, what you are reading. So in the research, or in this pedagogy, teachers were encouraged to read aloud for pleasure and not for instructional purposes. Over time, reading aloud became regular and interactive, offering children access to more complex themes and books. So this actually is really interesting, because it did focus on the teacher reading aloud. It focused on story time. Now, I don't quite know when story time disappeared from schools, because I did it at least through year 6, so up until I was 11 years old. We would finish, in every class I was in, we would finish every day with a story. We would all go and we would sit on the carpet and our teacher would read us a story. We kind of did that at the beginning of secondary school, but only in our English lessons. But then by the time I became a primary teacher, it wasn't really a thing anymore. I suppose because there was just too much to do. We were teaching it was usually our topic-based lessons, our history, our geography, our PE, our music, all of the non-core stuff. That was always being taught right up until the bell in the afternoon. There didn't seem to be any time anymore to have the kids come and sit and listen to a story. So it was something that I started doing in my French lessons, particularly in Key Stage 1. I would sit and I would read to them from a bilingual book, mostly so that they could start getting an understanding of French phonics and French pronunciation, but also just for the joy of hearing a story. And so I think if that is something that is disappearing, or has disappeared, it's something that could come back. And I think a lot about tutor time in secondary. I think about secondary school literacy strategies, which try to get children reading for pleasure. But again, outside of their English lessons, they probably don't have a class book that they sit and listen to. Whereas they could, if you are struggling for something to do in tutor time, in registration, read your children a book. Or if you feel, or they feel that that's a bit patronizing, a bit babyish, pop to the library and get an audiobook and kind of listen to it together. But by experiencing the story at the same rate and at the same time, you can talk about it together. And there's a lot of fun to be had in that. I am currently watching Agatha All Along on Disney Plus. I like the Marvel movies. Apologies if I'm not allowed to say the names of things that I'm watching. I don't know if that's advertising or not, but that is what I'm watching. One of the things that I'm enjoying is very frustrating because it is dropping at 1 episode a week, and I really like the binge model where I can just sit down for 3 hours and watch everything. But one of the interesting things about it is engaging with people on social media about the show, talking about theories. What do we think is going to happen next? Picking up on the little Easter eggs that have been dropped, picking up on the foreshadowing. And, that itself is an interesting and pleasurable activity, as well as a good exercise in media literacy. And so if we can do that with television, and if we can enjoy doing that with television, we can do that with books, with our classes. We can read a chapter and then begin to speculate what's going to happen next. And it doesn't need to be a worksheet. And it doesn't need to be written in an exercise book. It can just be a discussion that you have for the enjoyment of having it. But I think the important thing there is that you as the teacher, or, if you're a parent listening to this and this is something you're going to do with your children, just you as the adult, you need to be equally invested, because it's really only fun if everybody is having a good time. So, obviously we need to make sure that books are vetted before we read them to our children, but maybe pick a book that you haven't read yet. Get the librarian at your school to recommend something for you to read to your class, or for you and your class to listen to together. And, don't skip ahead, but go through that process with them. Model the process of enjoying hearing a story. And then maybe if you've got some confident readers, some confident storytellers in your tutor group, in your class, they might want to read eventually. And they might want to lead that, bringing their classmates through the stories with them. Which brings us quite nicely onto the second of these fundamentals, which is creating a social reading environment. Now, this is something else that I see advocated quite a lot on social media. There's a big push at the moment to have entertainment spaces for grown-ups that are not centered around alcohol. And one of the ideas that I kind of see touted a lot, which to be fair could just be because I spend a lot of time exploring kind of book-related social media, but it's this idea of extending library open hours and kind of using libraries more as a social hub, as a place that people can go and they will sit and they will read and they can drink coffee. I guess kind of like you would expect to do in a bookshop, but without that expectation of buying something. And I think, again, if this is something that we are wanting as adults, it's probably something that would appeal to children as well. So can you make your classroom a social reading environment? Now, in this study, that's exactly what teachers did. They completely reconfigured their classroom spaces in order to make reading more comfortable and more engaging. So some teachers created specific areas for diverse books in their classroom. Some teachers created a reading corner. Some teachers created displays. They made reading prominent in their social space, and they created social space specifically for reading. Because again, it's like everything, isn't it? If you take something out of the shadows, if you shine a light on something, then it normalizes it. And so if your children see you as the teacher reading, or you as the parent reading, if they see their peers engaging in reading, they are more likely to pick up a book and to want to read as well.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking and feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at BET UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
Book talk and recommendations is the next kind of facet, next pillar in this pedagogy. And during the study, teachers continued to do things like guided reading, where they could have kind of formal discussions about books, structured discussions about books. But they also engaged with their children more informally and in a more unstructured manner to find out their interests, figure out what makes them tick, and then recommend books to them that way. I follow a school librarian from Texas on social media, and she made a video the other day about a comment she got that said, every time you get a book off of your wish list, you say that you know exactly the kid that it's going to go to. And she said, well, yeah, I do. She takes pride in knowing her children. The entire school, she teaches I think it's an elementary and middle school. So she teaches kindergarten through 8th grade, which is year 1 to year 9. And she takes pride in the fact that she knows all of those children and that she can kind of match books to kids really, really easily. Now, we as teachers take pride in the fact that we know our children. And while we might not know books as well as librarians do, because we know our children, we can find things that interest them. Even if that means going to the librarian and saying, right, I've got this reluctant reader in my class. She really likes horses. What can we recommend? What can you recommend for her to read? And, the more you know somebody, the easier it is to recommend them things. You can also do anti-recommendations, which is something that I've seen lately on YouTube from the booktubers, where they've been saying, right, I'm friends with this person who makes these videos. We have completely the opposite taste in reading. So whenever this person does a video saying, I hated this book, I go and buy it. And that's sort of the same, you can do, again, the same thing with children. If you know that Helen and Jim, the twins, have completely opposite taste, when Helen has read a book and has hated it, you can recommend it to Jim. And again, it is just about knowing your children, which is, something that we all believe that we do. We're all told about the importance of forming those relationships, and what a good relationship can be formed, or how good a relationship can be formed from recommending books to them, from saying, I know that you really like topic X, look at what's in the library. And again, this is where teachers and librarians really can work closer together in order to really maximize the amount of book discussions, the number of book discussions that go on in schools in a given day. Just going back to guided reading for a second, circling back to that, I think there is a gap in the market for guided reading books that don't feel like they are guided reading books. Now, those of you who are primary teachers, I hope will understand what I mean. Guided reading, in case you're not sure, is an initiative that was very popular when I was a primary teacher. It doesn't seem to be as popular these days as it was back in the day. But it is still a recommended pedagogy where with a whole class or with a group, you sit and you read the same book together, and then you do worksheets on it. And it is a way of helping to build up children's literacy skills, their analytical skills. But one of the issues that I always had with guided reading was the books always felt like the worksheets came first. they never really felt like actual stories that the children were supposed to engage with and enjoy. They always felt like textbooks that the children were supposed to engage with and then answer questions about, which I suppose they were. But I think there's a gap in the market. So again, if any children's publishers are listening to this, get in touch. I'm a writer, we can come to an arrangement. But I do think there's a gap in the market for guided reading books that you have accompanying worksheets for and all of that sort of thing, activities, but that actually feel like real books, that feel like a book that you could go and check out from the library. Because I always thought that guided reading would be much more interesting for the kids, because my classes always hated guided reading. They did not like when that came up for them on the rotation. But I always thought it'd be much more interesting if guided reading were more like doing a book club, where you sat and, again, kind of like I said earlier about reading aloud, reading a book with the class, you sat and you read the same thing together and you talked about it and you discovered it together. Now, of course, our obsession in schools with writing stuff down, with having evidence that you have done things, as if you ever just sit and let the kids talk to each other, that kind of means that there has to be worksheets involved instead of just a conversation. But again, there are creative ways around that. Why do a worksheet instead of creating a display? Why do a worksheet instead of designing an illustration for the chapter heading? Why do a worksheet instead of acting out what we've just read as a play script? There are all sorts of ways that you could do it, that you could get kids engaged, or in fact, just sit and have a conversation about the chapter that you've just read. I don't know, I feel like quite often one of the reasons that children begin to fall out of love with reading, because let's be honest, most children love reading when they're little. Foundation stage, key stage 1, so between the ages of 4 and 6, then maybe as you go up into year 3 and 4, so maybe the ages 4 to 8, children really like books. They like going and choosing a new one. They like going to the library. They like sitting and reading. But a lot of them then fall out of love with it as they discover other activities, as they get a bit older, and as reading in class stops being about enjoying the book and starts being about doing a worksheet on it, writing an essay about it. And again, I think there is room for both. But if we are talking about encouraging reading for pleasure, then we need to make reading be seen as a pleasurable activity. Then the last pillar of the reading for pleasure pedagogy, of course, is independent reading. So teachers giving their students daily opportunities to choose what they want to read and to read it independently. Taking them to the library and giving them free rein. And if you have got a very able reader, a very capable reader, if you've got a year 11 who is predicted a 9 in their GCSE and they are your A-level hope, but they come back with a comic, let them read the comic, because there is nothing wrong with that. And again, talking cultural capital, which has become my obsession over the last couple of years, many children don't have access to a library outside of school. Lots of children don't have access to a library in school, and that's a whole separate issue. But, lots of towns now, the libraries have closed, particularly in smaller towns and villages. Even in bigger cities, the library might be difficult to get to, or the parents may not be particularly interested in reading and so don't take their children to the library. So it might be that school visits to the library are the only time that they get to independently choose a book. Now, we can also say, oh yeah, but if you want books, you can buy them, you can go on Amazon, you can get them secondhand, you can go to the charity shop. There are all sorts of ways to access books, which is true. But when the ability to borrow a book exists, when you don't have to spend money on it, when you may not have the money to spend on a book, but you can still get one because you can go to the library, why spend the money? Now, school days are packed. We know this. It is very difficult to give students daily opportunities to read independently. But that happened in this study, and the conclusion was that having that opportunity to read every day fostered a love of reading. It kind of became part of their routine. It became part of their life. They were allowed the space to just enjoy what they were doing. And so often that gets taken away. Like I was saying at the top of the show, we're recognizing my hypocrisy right now, but how indulgent does it feel just to sit and read? And yet, if you do that, you feel good about reading, because it is, like Tim said when he texted in before, it is about self-care. It is about taking time for yourself to do something that you like to do. Now, Steph and Eleanor were two key teachers in this study. They worked collaboratively together to develop the reading for pleasure pedagogy. They found that by installing those 4 pillars, the reading aloud, creating a social reading environment, book talk and recommendations, and time for independent reading, plus increasing access to diverse texts and creating more opportunities for reading, their students showed significant improvements in reading engagement and, because unfortunately this is something we have to be concerned with, reading test scores. Because it stands to reason, doesn't it? The more practice a child gets at reading, the better they can read, the higher their test score is going to be. That's self-evident. And it's not just going to be better in English. It's not just going to be better in reading tests. It's going to be better across the curriculum. Remember, the word lecture, when you go to a university lecture, comes from the French word lecture, reading, because quite often knowledge comes through reading, through that assimilation of the written word. So the more opportunities we give children to read, and the more we foster this idea of reading for pleasure, so they are then reading outside of the classroom, the better they are going to be across the curriculum. The final study that I want to talk about is called Young People's Reading and Writing, an in-depth study focusing on enjoyment, behaviour, attitudes and attainment. And this was a report, a desk study by the UK government, I believe. I'm just going to actually double check that now. Oh yes, it was. Which presented findings from a large-scale study of young people's attitudes towards reading and writing, which focused on enjoyment, behaviour and attainment, and the interlink between the three. The survey involved 17,000 students aged 8 to 16 from across the UK. So what I like about this study is the scale. 17,000 students is a big number. This isn't just one small-scale study done in one school. And also the fact that it looked at those older students. So like I said, and this does not mean that it's easy for our foundation stage, key stage 1 colleagues to get their children to read, because we know that it's not. And we know that they focus on a whole host of different skills. But that kind of inherent love of reading, I guess the novelty of reading, has worn off by the time a child gets to about 8 years old. And so this is when you do really begin to see the disengagement. And so I quite like that it's focused on these older children when we might feel that the engagement is beginning to wane. Their key findings included 51% of young people said that they enjoyed reading very much or quite a lot. So actually, the love of reading doesn't drop as much as we might think. 58% of girls enjoyed reading compared to 43% of boys. And that gender disparity is actually not as big as we might stereotypically think. And as I've alluded to, enjoyment of reading declines with age, with older students reporting lower levels of reading enjoyment than younger. So we're going to look at some of those figures in a bit more depth. 51% of young people said that they enjoyed reading very much or quite a lot. But boys were significantly less likely to enjoy reading compared to girls. And 15% more girls enjoyed reading in 2009 compared to 2005. So they did actually see an increase in the number of girls who enjoyed reading, but that number for boys remained steady. Many young people hold positive attitudes towards reading. So as a culture, we clearly create quite a good buzz around reading, but boys are more likely to view reading as being either boring or difficult. More boys agreed with the statement reading is boring and reading is hard than girls did, and they were more likely to agree with those than some statements that were more positive about reading. When they were asked to self-report on their reading ability, most young people rated themselves as average or very good. Girls were consistently rated higher than boys, so they consistently self-identified as being good at reading more than boys did. And students from higher socioeconomic backgrounds reported greater confidence in their reading skills. Now, again, we heard in the news from Joe that children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, or children whose parents had been through university and were in kind of graduate jobs, were more likely to be able to navigate the world of work and the world of university than their peers who came from other backgrounds. And once again, this is all about that cultural capital. It's all about what our children have access to and how in school we can level that playing field a little bit. Everybody has advantages in some domains over others. That kind of just is the nature of the world, I suppose. But I do think that part of our job in school is to create as level a playing field as possible, and to make sure that the children who don't have access to books at home do have access to them in school, because that doesn't detract from the children that also have access to books at home. They also get access to books in school. But what it does do is creates opportunity that wouldn't otherwise exist for those that don't have it. Worryingly, this report found that access to resources was unevenly distributed, with 79.1% of girls reporting that they owned books compared to 66.5% of boys. Now, again, this is going to come down to interest and perceived interest, isn't it? Because if you've got more boys than girls saying that they find reading hard and boring, they are more likely to ask for a games console or a football kit for Christmas than they are for a book. But there's also, I think, a social aspect to this, whereas because we have this perception as a society, which is kind of true, that girls enjoy reading more than boys do, we are probably more likely to give books to girls than to boys as gifts, which then creates this cycle of girls having more access to books and access to reading than boys, and so it stands to reason that they enjoy it more. So I think this is, it's self-perpetuating, isn't it? Because we know that girls tend to enjoy books more than boys, we give them books so they have more access to it, so they enjoy it more. And it just keeps going round and round and round. The survey also found disparities in access to computers and to the internet, particularly among disadvantaged students. And again, the internet is reading, mostly. It used to be in the early days of the internet, it was entirely reading. There wasn't a website that didn't have reading on it. We then found, and we charted that progress, going from everybody had a blog to everybody had a Twitter to people started making videos, and now kind of video and audio content is more popular than written content is. But again, to navigate the internet, you need to be able to read, and reading things on the internet, reading comments, reading captions on Instagram, it's all reading practice. It's still reading. So where we've got students with more limited access to the internet, we've got students with more limited access to reading. Reading frequency declines with age, with 32%. I keep messing up these numbers, I'm very sorry. 32% of students reading daily. Students in Key Stage 2, so students between the ages of 7 and 11, are more likely to read frequently outside of class, possibly because they've got a reading record that they need to get their parents to fill in, while older students, so the 11 to 16-year-olds who were surveyed, tended to read less often outside of class. In terms of writing, 52% of the young people reported that they enjoyed writing either very much or quite a lot. Once again, girls were more likely to enjoy writing than boys, and enjoyment of writing decreases with age. Now that's an interesting one, because I think a lot of that starts being about whether you perceive that you're good at it. Because as you get older, you want to engage in hobbies that you feel you are good at. I remember when I stopped drawing and painting. I used to really like painting when I was younger, but I'm not very good at art. And I did kind of just stop doing it. By the age of about 12, the only time I ever did any painting was in my art lessons at school. Whereas when I was much younger, we used to be getting the powder paints and, those little watercolor palettes that you would get. We used to get those out all the time and just paint. So I think at some point you do stop enjoying things that you perceive yourself as not being very good at. And I think, there's nothing wrong with then stopping a hobby, because if you're not actually enjoying it, why carry it on? But at the same time, I think we shouldn't always be worried about tying up our self-worth into our hobbies and saying, oh, I'm not very good at this, so I don't enjoy it, so I can't do it. And, start saying, okay, I may not be very good at this, but I do still enjoy it, and so I am going to carry on. But I think that's a really complex kind of psychological domain that I'm really not qualified to talk on. The most popular writing formats are, of course, technology-based: texting, writing social media posts, writing emails were the most popular form. So the young people in this study engaged with writing for communicative purposes, for social purposes. Girls were then more likely to engage in creative writing, such as fiction. They were also more likely to engage in journaling. And again, that's a lot, I think, to do with socialization and the fact that journaling is very much about emotion and about self-reflection, which as societies we do tend to encourage in girls more than we do in boys. So the report in general highlighted the importance of fostering positive attitudes towards reading and writing, as we've talked about over the last couple of shows, particularly among boys and disadvantaged students. Access to resources such as books and technology play a significant role in literacy attainment. And once again, I know I've banged on a lot about libraries over the past couple of weeks, but this is why libraries are so important. And this is why, like I said about work experience earlier, the school should not be the only service available to children, because schools' budgets are limited, schools' budgets are stretched. It is really sad, the number of reports I've read recently of schools that have had to close down their library services because they couldn't afford the librarian, they couldn't afford the upkeep of the books. They had to turn the library into a computer lab or a media center, or they needed something else to do with that space, so the library is now gone. And if you've got a child whose school library has gone and their town library has gone, and they are from a disadvantaged economic background, so buying books is maybe not the top of the parents' priority list, no matter how much they may want it to be, that child is not having the same access, is not having any access to reading. And so how can we expect that child to develop a love of reading and to develop all of the positives that come from reading that we've talked about over the past couple of shows if they don't have access to it? And so this is why investment in things like libraries, like youth clubs, in just things for children to do outside of school is so important. And it's important for us as teachers because, as we have seen, as these reports have said, higher literacy rates improve test scores. And like I said, that's not just in English, but it's in everything, because it gives them better access to the tests that they are taking.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking and feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at BetUK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
All right, I think we have broken the curse. Because we have made it to the end of what should have been one show 2 weeks ago. Thank you so much for being with me on this Reading for Pleasure journey. I hope that you have taken something from it, if only the fact that I'm giving you permission to read for pleasure. You, as an adult, I am telling you that you are allowed to read for pleasure, because if it has all of these benefits for our young people in terms of their learning, their enjoyment, their relaxation, their self-care, as Tim said at the beginning, then it has those same advantages for you. So pick up a book, go to the library, go to the bookshop, go to the charity shop, whatever it is that you want to do. Make your way through your TBR pile, but take some time this weekend to do some reading, because I think we have all earned it. And let me know what you're reading. Once again, you can engage with me on social media. I'm at Mr. D. Lester, that's MIDLESTER, on Twitter. Let me know what you're reading. Give me some recommendations so that I can get rid of this bad luck number 13 on my TBR pile. Xander is up at 11, I believe, with a show, so do stay tuned for that. I will be back with you for breakfast next Saturday morning, which I am very much looking forward to. Thank you all for listening. I will see you next week. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.